The Trump administration launched a major military and diplomatic escalation in its new war on drugs today, sending an aircraft carrier to Latin America and sanctioning Colombia's president.
Saturday, President Trump declared that Venezuelan airspace should be considered closed.
The moment the Venezuelan F-16s cut across the radar sweep.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country.
The USS Gerald R knew this wasn't a routine patrol. It was a direct challenge over open water.
By the Trump administration declaring Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, and his government among the world's most dangerous terrorist organizations.
Two fighters skimmed the Caribbean surface, closing fast, their approach patterns far too aggressive to ignore. Alarms rose, the bridge tightened.
That's exactly what these foreign terrorist organizations are. And so we will track them, we will map them, we will network them, and we will hunt them and kill them.
Tracer fire snapped nearby. And as both sides edged closer to the line, the only question was how long the standoff could hold before someone made a move neither could take back. The naval buildup in the Caribbean. In the final stretch of 2025, American defense strategists shifted their gaze toward the Caribbean, a zone shaped for decades by secret channels, contested politics, and heavy maritime traffic. The move to reinforce naval presence was not an impulse. It grew from months of classified briefings hinting that the balance of influence in those waters was changing. At the core of this push stood the USS Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke-class Aegis destroyer built for sharp detection and multi-layered protection. Its arrival meant far more than a scheduled deployment. It marked the start of a focused maritime stance that would soon capture the attention of foreign ministries and intelligence watchers around the world. Washington publicly described the operation as a response to the expanding maze of narcotics pipelines and armed criminal networks using the Caribbean as a highway. Officials emphasized old smuggling trails, shifting cartel partnerships, and the rising activity of gunmen scattered along Venezuela's northern coast. The stated mission appeared simple: disrupt illicit transport routes and restore stability to waters where criminal enterprises had grown sophisticated. Yet behind those explanations, specialists noticed a different rhythm emerging. A series of destroyers, amphibious platforms, and logistical vessels moved into the theater in a pattern suggesting preparation for contingencies far broader than a routine interdiction patrol. As the ships took up steady positions, the tone of the region began to shift. Merchant crews, fishermen, and tanker operators reported more frequent radio queries from American vessels. Overhead, satellite images showed warships forming layered defensive rings designed to catch any threat approaching from air, sea, or below the surface. Everything about the arrangement hinted at a task force ready for multiple scenarios, rather than one narrowly defined mission. Inside Caracas, the interpretation was very different. Venezuelan leaders treated the deployment as a pointed message aimed at their government, rather than a mere crackdown on smugglers. State broadcasters questioned why such high-end warships were needed to chase traffickers. Analysts within the armed forces claimed the United States was edging toward their maritime boundary with calculated patience, studying how quickly Venezuela would respond. Officials framed the buildup as a strategic probe disguised as an enforcement effort. Tension rippled gradually across the Caribbean as the USS Jason Dunham and its accompanying fleet became central to a broader transformation in a region where security, politics, and perception are tightly intertwined. United States strike on Venezuelan-linked vessel. Pressure in the Caribbean surged like a storm-gathering force after the early September incident. On the second day of September 2025, American forces intercepted a fast-moving vessel slicing through the southern Caribbean corridor. United States officials tied the boat to entrenched narcotics networks with links to Venezuelan security forces, backed by months of painstaking surveillance across multiple federal agencies. The strike hit with surgical precision, but the shock spread far beyond the kill zone. 11 lives were lost, and within hours, news outlets across the region broadcast the event in stark headlines. Caracas reacted with fury, denouncing the operation as a brazen intrusion into waters it claimed as sovereign. Inside Venezuelan command centers, tension hung heavy. Military advisors saw the interdiction not as routine enforcement, but as a deliberate probe, testing their reaction speed. Official statements droned on about violations of sovereignty, but behind closed doors, anxiety ran deep. Senior commanders feared the United States was moving beyond narrow counter-narcotics operations toward a broader campaign of pressure, using the strike to expose gaps in Venezuela's maritime defenses. Almost immediately, Venezuelan air crews went on heightened alert, signaling that more encounters could be imminent. Across the region, United States vessels shifted stance in response. The USS Jason Dunham and its escorts detected spikes in radar activity along the coast. Patrol aircraft reported unusual sortie patterns from multiple Venezuelan airfields. Each blip, each maneuver underscored a chilling truth. The Caribbean had become a powder keg, and both sides knew it. Washington assured allies that the mission targeted only illegal trafficking, yet internal intelligence acknowledged Caracas now read every movement as a piece of a larger unfolding pressure campaign. Escalation came swiftly. 5 days after the strike, Venezuelan F-16 fighters roared off a northern coastal airbase. Intelligence later confirmed the jet's classification, but no attack orders were issued. Their flight path, sharp and deliberate, sent a clear signal. As they neared open waters, USS Jason Dunham's sensors caught them long before the jets were visible, and the destroyer's combat systems slid seamlessly from routine scans to full threat analysis, weapons primed but held in check. The fighters dropped low, skimming the waves in a roar of jet engines that rattled the decks. No missiles fired, no shots exchanged, yet the intent was unmistakable. Every sailor felt the shift in the air. What had begun as a targeted interdiction now teetered on the edge of a far wider confrontation. The show of force. The flyover rattled the crew on deck more than anyone expected. Early on the 4th day of September 2025, 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighters took off from a northern coastal base. Almost immediately, their flight path made their intentions crystal clear. Every climb, every turn toward open water, every speed shift seemed designed so the USS Jason Dunham would notice them long before they got close. The pilots didn't speak over the radio. No words were needed. The message was in their approach. Inside the ship's combat center, everything changed in an instant. 2 fast-moving blips appeared on the radar, breaking the usual calm of routine tracking. Identification was quick. They knew exactly what they were looking at. Analysts studied every detail: dips in altitude, bursts of speed, the perfect spacing between the jets. It was obvious the pilots knew exactly how far they could push without crossing the line into outright attack. As the fighters neared, the warning became physical. They dropped so low that some sailors later said the jets seemed to skim the surface. The roar of the engines hit like a wall, rattling everything on deck. Still, the ship stayed steady. Orders moved through the channels, monitored, evaluated, and documented, but do not fire unless it becomes necessary. Every system tracked the aircraft flawlessly, and hands stayed off triggers. Back in Washington, the United States Command watched in real time. Analysts and senior officials followed every second, concluding the Venezuelans were not reckless, they were precise. In Venezuela, military leaders saw it as a small win. They had flown directly over one of America's top destroyers without interference. But they also knew a single pass did not change anything. Real influence would take constant pressure, not a one-off stunt. Reports later showed squadrons went on higher alert, ready for whatever came next. For the sailors aboard Jason Dunham, the fading roar of the jets was a clear signal. The uneasy calm in the Caribbean was gone. The air felt sharper, heavier. What happened next, whether the standoff stayed contained or spiraled out of control, would depend entirely on the decisions in the days ahead. Warning and diplomatic fallout. The message from Washington hit hard and left no room for doubt. Before night fully fell over the Caribbean, the Pentagon released a statement that cut through all the uncertainty. Officials made it clear that any interference with United States forces would trigger responses already planned, long before Venezuelan aircraft ever appeared on radar. The announcement carried the unmistakable confidence of a nation used to projecting power. One thing was clear: the flyover had crossed a line the United States considered non-negotiable. The ripple effect through diplomatic channels was immediate. Instructions rushed to embassies across the hemisphere, pushing ambassadors to spell out the seriousness of the situation. Analysts from London to Tokyo issued warnings that a single misstep could make the confrontation spiral. One aggressive maneuver, a misread transmission, or a misinterpreted signal could push 2 longtime rivals toward a collision neither side wanted. Caracas pushed back with its own narrative. State-controlled outlets claimed Washington was trying to force Venezuela into submission. Officials insisted that monitoring foreign vessels near their waters was within their rights. Across the region, intelligence officers saw deeper layers fueling the tension even as public messaging tried to simplify the story. These competing accounts shaped alliances and colored media coverage far beyond Latin America. At sea, United States ships stayed in place. Their continued presence sent a quiet but clear signal that Washington had no intention of backing down. Crews adjusted to a new rhythm, with longer watches, extra drills, and constant coordination with patrol aircraft. Every radar sweep and satellite feed built a growing map of a region teetering toward instability. Beyond the horizon, think tanks and military experts studied the situation with concern. Few could remember such heightened tension in the Caribbean. Analysts noted how quickly routine operations could turn into diplomatic crises when every move was viewed through a political lens. One wrong decision could ignite consequences neither side expected. Inside the Pentagon, planners reviewed scenarios not touched in nearly 10 years. The biggest fear was not a deliberate strike, but an accidental escalation. Contested borders, secret networks, and competing political narratives made miscommunication the most dangerous weapon. Every choice from here on had the power to either ease the strain or push it further. A quiet unease settled across the Caribbean. Warships continued their circuits. Venezuelan units adjusted readiness protocols. Diplomatic cables multiplied. Beneath the surface, calm. Both sides understood the same truth. The next move, even the smallest, could either calm the storm or drag the region deeper into danger. The silence between maneuvers carried its own weight, thick and unrelenting. Widening crisis. In the days that followed, the Caribbean moved from uneasy to volatile. Venezuelan authorities wasted no time expanding their operations, presenting the surge as a defensive reaction to what they described as growing foreign interference. State media broadcast clips of pilots climbing into cockpits, technicians readying aircraft, and coastal units drilling along key stretches of shoreline. The imagery projected confidence, but the tempo behind these movements hinted at a shift far beyond routine demonstrations. Regional intelligence quickly picked up patterns, suggesting deeper planning. Satellites tracked combat aircraft, redeploying toward bases closer to major maritime corridors. Artillery units along the coast ran rehearsals that added new variables for any ship operating near Venezuelan waters. Patrol vessels altered long-established routes, disrupting the rhythms commercial shippers had relied on to assess risk. Maritime security analysts warned that these adjustments were more than cosmetic. They pointed to preparations for an extended period of heightened tension. Neighboring governments watched with concern. States across the Caribbean and northern South America understood how easily a signal meant for warning could spiral into conflict. Foreign ministries quietly discussed contingency plans in case merchant routes required safeguarding. None sought direct involvement, but each recognized that an unexpected encounter between naval units could trigger diplomatic consequences far beyond the immediate area. Commercial operators also noticed the changes. Shipping companies adjusted schedules, reviewed insurance clauses, and steered certain vessels away from zones where Venezuelan patrol craft were appearing more frequently. Their choices were driven by more than caution. Overlapping drills, heightened alert cycles, and shifting radar patterns created pockets of uncertainty, where even routine passages carried new risks. Inside Venezuela, the mobilization continued to expand. Civilian auxiliary groups aligned with the government joined readiness exercises that, despite limited equipment, strengthened the country's defensive posture. Their involvement signaled a strategy aimed at sustained tension rather than a short-term spike. Leadership appeared ready for a drawn-out standoff with fluctuating intensity. Across the water, United States forces tracked every development through aerial surveillance and naval platforms already patrolling international waters. Commanders adjusted patrol lines to avoid unnecessary clashes while maintaining a firm presence. With both nations expanding their operational footprint without direct communication, the environment became increasingly fragile. Observers across the region drew the same conclusion. Ordinary maneuvers now carried extraordinary meaning. A slight change in heading, a sudden climb, or a radar shift could spark a crisis neither side intended, but both would struggle to contain. The Caribbean had entered a phase where tension hung in every movement, and one wrong choice could tip the balance. USS Stockdale and broader naval surge. As tension thickened across the region, the arrival of USS Stockdale sent a quiet shockwave through the Caribbean. The destroyer slipped into formation with the existing United States ships, expanding their operational web until every patrol line overlapped. Together, they created a shifting shield of radar coverage that tracked aircraft, surface vessels, and unpredictable maritime traffic with almost no gaps. Each rotation fed into the next, forming a continuous presence that left little room for missteps. The Stockdale carried a reputation from previous deployments in high-risk zones, and its appearance was taken seriously. Analysts understood that Washington didn't assign a ship of that caliber unless it expected the situation to head in an uncertain direction. With advanced combat systems and sensors far more capable than older destroyers, it strengthened the fleet's ability to detect sudden changes in Venezuelan air or naval behavior. For many watching, the deployment hinted at preparations for a potential escalation. Missile-armed destroyers, amphibious platforms, and aviation elements now operated as a single, flexible unit. Surveillance aircraft traced the movement of vessels leaving Venezuelan ports, while helicopters swept low across commercial corridors crowded with shipping traffic. Amphibious ships added extra sensors and logistical depth, giving the task force the ability to maintain its posture without relying on nearby docks or support. This expanded presence reshaped the strategic reality for Venezuela's forces. Their aircraft now approached radar envelopes far more advanced than those they usually faced. Patrol boats moved through waters where every deviation in speed, position, or radio call could be captured and analyzed almost instantly. Military planners in Caracas recognized that the new environment reduced their margin for surprise and limited how far they could use unpredictable maneuvers to exert pressure. Across the region, neighboring governments monitored the United States deployment with mixed feelings. Some saw the strengthened posture as a stabilizing layer that could discourage sudden action from Venezuela. Others worried that so many naval units operating in tight proximity increased the chances of accidental encounters. Maritime authorities warned commercial ships to stay alert, as the dense military traffic created zones where mistakes could escalate rapidly. For Washington, bringing in USS Stockdale was part of a broader effort to maintain control over the unfolding situation. Inside defense circles, the move signaled that the crisis was moving into territory that might not stay limited to routine patrols. The growing number of ships in these contested waters pointed to a stark truth. The very next move, whether intentional or accidental, could decide what happened next. International ripple effects. The FAA advisory changed everything almost overnight, pulling civilian networks into a conflict that had until now stayed on naval decks and inside military command centers. Airlines crossing northern South America quickly recalculated risk, rerouting long-haul flights away from Caribbean corridors near Venezuelan airspace. Routes that had been reliable just days before now carried the possibility of unannounced intercepts, radar shadowing, or other unpredictable military activity. Cargo operators felt the effects immediately. High-value shipments between Latin America, the United States, and Europe faced delays as certain flight paths were temporarily suspended. Time-sensitive supply chains, especially for perishable goods, came under pressure. Freight companies tracked developments closely, knowing that if tensions worsened, air transport might shift toward maritime routes already complicated by the growing United States naval presence. Commercial shipping companies also adjusted. Vessels slowed through the eastern Caribbean to avoid overlapping United States and Venezuelan patrol sectors, while others took longer, less efficient lanes. Insurance underwriters raised risk premiums for ships near Venezuelan waters, showing that the consequences of military tension were measurable in both operational costs and financial risk. Governments across the Caribbean and northern South America began reviewing their own exposure. Ports and airspace underwent rapid internal security assessments, while foreign ministries contacted Washington and Caracas, pressing for explanations and urging caution. The goal was not mediation but avoiding spillover that could threaten local economies or spark unintended incidents. Regional defense agencies heightened their monitoring. Air forces placed aircraft on alert to identify any planes approaching national airspace, while Coast Guards increased patrols along commercial shipping routes that intersected zones of elevated military activity. Every vessel and flight became a potential signal in a region where missteps could escalate quickly. International organizations and trade groups began warning of growing instability. Disrupted travel and shipping routes threatened economic ties, while humanitarian agencies noted that any further deterioration could complicate aid delivery to vulnerable areas in northern South America and the Caribbean. Countries with strong trade links to both Washington and Caracas walked a delicate line. Some pushed dialogue through regional forums, while others emphasized adherence to international airspace and maritime law. What became clear was that the confrontation had moved far beyond military boundaries. It was reshaping commerce, civilian travel, and regional perceptions of safety. As airlines rerouted, ships slowed, and diplomats weighed every word, analysts warned that these secondary effects could solidify into long-term disruption. The Caribbean was no longer just a stage for naval maneuvers. It had become a place where every move of a plane, ship, or public statement was measured against the risk of making the situation worse. United States restraint and avoidance of direct conflict. The near encounter between the Venezuelan fighters and the United States destroyer created a moment in which many feared the line between signaling and conflict might collapse. Yet as hours passed, the absence of gunfire or interception became significant in itself. Both governments recognized the stakes. Washington understood that a single missile launch or defensive burst from the ship's close-in weapon system could ignite a confrontation that neither side had formally chosen. Caracas, despite its rhetoric and mobilization, appeared aware that an attack on a United States Navy vessel would provoke a response far beyond symbolic gestures or diplomatic protest. In this fragile space, the United States restraint became a calculated decision rather than a passive stance. Commanders aboard the destroyer maintained combat readiness, but avoided actions that could be misinterpreted. Sensor arrays remained active, electronic warfare systems continued scanning for anomalies, and intercept teams reviewed rules of engagement repeatedly. Even so, the ship's posture remained visibly non-escalatory. Behind the scenes, internal communication channels across Washington lit up. Security officials assessed whether the overflight indicated a shift in Venezuelan doctrine or a one-time demonstration forced by political pressures in Caracas. Intelligence analysts evaluated radar traces, flight patterns, and recorded radio communications from the jets to determine if the pilots were acting under strict command authority or improvising. These assessments mattered because a misaligned chain of command on the Venezuelan side could increase the risk of future incidents spiraling out of control. Diplomats worked in parallel. Using intermediaries, the United States conveyed its expectation that Venezuelan forces avoid any closer approach to United States vessels operating in international waters. Although these messages did not soften the public rhetoric, they helped frame boundaries for military behavior. Regional partners were also briefed, both to maintain transparency and to reinforce that the United States' presence remained oriented toward counter-narcotics operations, not power projection against neighboring states. In Caracas, senior officials weighed their options carefully. The flyover achieved its intended goal of demonstrating displeasure and projecting defiance, but military planners understood that pushing further would bring consequences beyond their capacity to control. The mobilization of air and naval assets served domestic political aims by reinforcing the narrative of a government facing external threat. Yet the absence of follow-up aggressive actions suggested a deliberate cap on escalation. Leaders appeared determined to avoid forcing a confrontation that could expose gaps in their military readiness or provoke a response that the country's strained economy could not absorb. Meanwhile, regional observers noted that both sides were trying to manage the boundary between pressure and provocation. Analysts pointed out that previous confrontations between United States and Venezuelan forces had often featured rhetorical clashes more than military actions. This episode, however, marked a new threshold because the overflight represented a physical maneuver rather than a political statement. Even so, the decision by both navies to avoid further confrontation showed a shared understanding that neither side wished to transform a tense standoff into an open conflict. In that fragile moment, every choice mattered. Not firing, not intercepting, and staying in place all affected what would happen next. A warning signal for the region. The September 4th overflight quickly became a case study in how a single maneuver can reverberate across oceans and governments. In military academies and think tanks, analysts dissected the event in real time, emphasizing how just a few minutes of fast-moving jets overhead could trigger cascading effects. Radar operators tracked every turn, surveillance systems recorded each shift, and intelligence analysts monitored the unfolding pattern. Each second the fighters stayed in the air produced data and tension. The presence of those jets did not just mark an exercise, it created a web of operational and political pressure that extended far beyond the immediate horizon. Across the Caribbean, governments took note. Smaller nations with limited naval capabilities began re-evaluating patrol routines and contingency procedures, recognizing that even routine maritime activity could intersect with major powers in ways that risked escalation. Ports recalibrated shipping corridors, while airlines issued updated notices advising caution near Venezuelan airspace. Commercial traffic, once routine, now operates under the shadow of military posturing, a reminder that in contested regions, civilian and military spheres are inseparably linked. Observers also focused on the limits of signaling in modern naval operations. The United States, despite being the target of the maneuver, chose restraint. There was no engagement, no return fire, only measured observation. Analysts noted that the decision prevented a tactical incident from becoming a strategic catastrophe. Yet the flyover itself highlighted the fragility of peacetime in waters where military forces, political agendas, and criminal networks converge. One brief action, one calculated show of force, had captured the attention of governments, media, and commercial operators alike. Diplomatic channels buzzed long after the jets returned to base. United States officials shared assessments with allies, stressing surveillance coordination, intelligence sharing, and risk mitigation. The event became a reference for planning exercises, illustrating how restraint and precision can project power without triggering direct conflict. Venezuelan authorities framed the incident internally as proof of foreign interference, reinforcing narratives of sovereignty under threat. For strategists, policymakers, and regional operators, the encounter served as a powerful lesson. Modern naval operations extend beyond ordnance and firepower. Timing, visibility, and presence themselves are weapons. The flyover, brief yet resonant, crystallized the intersection of law enforcement, political signaling, and the shadow of illicit networks. Its legacy endures as a warning. In contested waters, even a carefully controlled maneuver carries consequences that ripple across borders, shaping regional security for months, sometimes years, to come. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.